Welcome to Tripping Over Love, where we talk all about breakdowns, breakups, and breakthroughs. I'm Courtney Corona with Keith Miller. Well, hello there.
Hello.
I was just thinking it is freezing outside.
It's getting warmer. It's balmy, 32 degrees.
Balmy. This was after days of single digits, which...
True.
Not a fan of.
So how was your morning?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this because I was really excited. So I've been doing a lot better in terms of my mental health and everything, but recently, because of some changes, I'm diving into a lot at work and things like that, and I'm waking up feeling relatively anxious, and I've been working on journaling in the morning and it's talking to myself and all sorts of things. But this morning I woke up and the anxiety was palpable. I felt so anxious. I was going to have a Xolair shot later on for my allergies. And I was sitting there and I was trying to do the IFS stuff where you talk to your parts. You talk to the parts in your head, right? Which is what I've learned from
dialogue,
you.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why we started this podcast, because it has been a game changer. So I'm trying to talk to my anxiety and I'm saying things like, okay, what's going on? What are you worried about? Can handle it, blah, blah, blah. And then finally I was like, screw that, because there was no conversation coming back. It was just like a black wall. My heart was beating faster. It was like, no. And then finally I was like, all right, I'll just love you. Which, I'm going to cry.
Oh.
Coming from somebody like me who used to be I would roll my eyes at this stuff, which is why I wanted to talk about it, because I legitimately would roll my eyes and think it was so ridiculous. But I told the anxiety that I loved it. And then I just laid in bed with my hands wrapped around my arms and hugged myself and was like, thank you for protecting me. I did a 180. All of a sudden, everything calmed down in my brain. My body relaxed. I started to cry uncontrollably. Once that calmed down, I started to yawn. And for me, yawning is a release. I don't yawn on a day-to-day basis.
You were really relaxing.
Yeah. No, I am very uptight all the time. I don't really show it, but I don't yawn. Even when I'm exhausted, it's not something. The only time I yawn is when I have like a breakthrough moment and my body relaxes.
What about to yawn?
There you go. Yeah. But for about 45 minutes, I just laid at bed from 4 to 4:45, yawning and crying, and felt so peaceful afterwards. So I just wanted to share that because it's like you said when I called you, you're like, well, sometimes it's just the most simple things. And I think if you just tell somebody that, like, oh, talk to your anxiety, tell it you love it. Like, it sounds so woo-woo. And admittedly, I'm woo-woo at this point in my life. But yeah, it was a game changer. So
it's really cool because the sort of beginner level of conversations and dialogues with yourself and your parts is often a little bit formulaic. It's a little bit like interviewing and prodding and
And you're talking about when you say parts, it's
like your anxious part of you.
The voices in my head that are telling me different things.
Yeah, a voice. It can be a voice. It can be a feeling in the body. Sometimes it's not a voice. It's like a sensation in the body. Sometimes it's a thought and a train of thoughts that's coming from one or multiple parts.
Yeah.
So yeah, we teach. Try to have a detached conversation from it. Meaning, like you're in the seat of a theater, and the part of you that you're feeling is now up on stage, and so it's a dissociative technique that's helpful, especially with strong emotions or parts of us that we really don't like and would never want to interact with. It helps you realize, okay, this is like another person. Yawn, get it out of the way, everybody yawn. Anyway, that's what's cool about that is you're really talking about sort of the advanced level of dialogue that we hope people will get to, which is just sort of intimate sort of presence. As opposed to agenda-based, like trying to fix our parts, like.
Oh yeah, and I'm a solution. Let me fix everything.
If you had a parent, or you have a parent, or you are a parent who, when your kids are struggling with something, you try to fix it, and then you're probably going to have some of those parts. So your kids are going to have some of those parts that when they're struggling with something, the only thing they instinctively want to do is fix it, and that can make it so much worse because emotions they're meant to be there. They're not meant to be gotten rid of. And when we give them space and presence, they just
And love.
yawn,
Yeah.
and then you go about your day. It's
Yeah, it was
a
really
great
chill.
story. That's a great.
So I wanted to share that.
That's so cool.
But more interestingly, we had a conversation about sex and drugs.
Yeah. So today
No rock and roll. No rock
we got to
and
get the
roll.
rock and roll in here. We're gonna get some rock and
Get a
roll.
little young blood in there. I'd be happy.
Yeah, calling out to young blood. We talked to Michael Vigorito. He's a sex therapist in Washington, D.C., and he leads and specializes in leading groups that focus on dealing with out-of-control drug use with gay men. And so we talk about all sorts of things, but this idea of taking the shame out of the conversation about pairing drugs with sex, which everybody does with alcohol, as we talked about at the top of it, right? And then
for enjoyment, for pleasure, to dissociate, all sorts of reasons. So he gets into the reasons why, and then really how to think about it and how to think about it safely, but not in a shameful way.
Yeah, and we talk about a whole bunch of different drugs. So I think it's helpful. I think, heads up, kind of a warning if you feel like you struggle with a drug use disorder or just struggle with boundaries with drugs, this might not be the conversation to listen to.
Yeah.
Because we do talk explicitly about drug use, and it's something that Michael made clear, and I really echo this, which is that everything in moderation and anything that's really good, any drug that produces a good feeling can very quickly also become very negative and really harmful to you. So everything with a grain of salt here.
Yes, absolutely. All right, enjoy.
Here's Michael. Welcome, Michael. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I'd love to chat with you about what you do. So you're a therapist. Tell us all about that.
Sure. I'm a sex therapist in the DC area. I primarily work with men concerned about problematic and out-of-control sexual behavior, kind of individual, group, and some couples work. The groups I run are kind of specifically for people concerned about sexual behavior problems. And then I have one group that is specifically for gay and bisexual men who are concerned about their sexual health in recovery from meth addiction.
The reason we reached out to you is you had sent an email out to the community that we're part of as therapists, talking about the interaction between psychedelics or recreational drugs in general, I guess, and sex. And that caught my attention because we talk about all things related to sex and relationships and psychedelics. So I thought, wow, this could be a really interesting...
A different angle that we have not explored yet.
Yes. Yeah. So my first question is, if sex feels amazing, how do you know if it's a problem versus just a preference to use drugs?
I think the problems usually come into play when there are consequences that they don't like. So it could be consequences around their own mental health, financial health, relationships, where it gives people pause. They're like, maybe I need to be looking at some of these decisions I'm making to see if the benefits of pairing sex with drugs outweigh the costs that I'm starting to experience. That's usually what kind of starts the conversation for people to come to see me.
And from layman's terms, as we were talking about this, so Keith is obviously the therapist. I come in with just the random questions, the average person. But as we think about this, my first question was, if somebody is dealing with, or I guess is it even fair to say, when you're working with people, are they dealing with an addiction? Or are there people who come in and say, I really just enjoy sex when I am under, a substance or something along those lines, and working through that? I'm just trying to think through the layers of when this discussion is really important and when it's really helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of times clients will come in with that same question, like, am I addicted? Does this mean I'm addicted? If I'm addicted, then I must seek treatment. So it's all these things that are tied up into that question. And I actually invite people to take a step back, and I'm not even sure if that is the most relevant question. That's why I even framed it just when I was answering Keith's question. I was like, sometimes the most relevant question is are the costs outweighing the benefits? Because I work from a motivational perspective. To me, that is what will drive change. Just because I say you meet the criteria for a substance use disorder doesn't mean that they're motivated for help or change. So I want to come in and kind of ground it in what are they motivated for? What are the reasons that they are pairing sex with drugs? There's a function here. And if they're having trouble like disconnecting that or stopping it or using it in a way that feels aligned with their values, then let's have this conversation about what we want to do with your relationship with substances, and if we want to continue pairing it or moderate it or stop it altogether.
And that really meshes with your whole point about flipping this perspective on its head, that it's always a problem, right? Is that fair to say?
That is very fair to say. Like, one of the things I was concerned when I'm starting to talk about problems with pairing sex with drugs, that people are just going to hear that it's always problematic. I should stay away from this. I should never pair sex with drugs. I want to bring the conversation back and just get curious. It's like, people do this for a reason. Can we understand what your reasons are? Because there might be ways to, again, achieve whatever goal that you have with this behavior in a way that is just less problematic. But because drug use is so stigmatized, and some of the drugs that people will pair with sex can be particularly fearful for folks, that they just kind of retract and they get very afraid about this conversation in general, and will just kind of avoid it altogether. So to me, those avoidant defenses are not helpful. I want people to be able to kind of self-regulate, to manage the feelings they have in these conversations, so they can then get curious about the reasons why they're pairing sex with drugs, the functions, the motivations that they have.
So I'm dying to know what are like the top 3 substances that get talked about the most, and obviously alcohol has got to be on one of the top lists. I know so many couples who have said, when I'm doing a history and talking about their first sexual experiences together, some of them are like, we've never had one sober, actually. That's just always been part of. So what are the top 3, and then how does that differ between heterosexuals, straight couples, gay men, lesbian couples? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, this is actually one of the questions I ask when I'm doing trainings. So I'm like, all right, everyone, what do you think are the top substances that people pair with sex? And then
should we guess?
Yeah, please guess. What do you think?
Oh, goodness.
What do you?
I know psychedelics. I don't know anything about other drugs. I'm going with cocaine, MDMA, and I can't even think of another one.
Okay,
I'm going with those 2.
Cocaine, MDMA. I'm going to take alcohol off the list because I think people assume that's just what everybody does, and that's not even a drug. There's just this misconception about alcohol being a drug in the first place, which it is. It's probably the top one, I would say. But I'd also say, Michael, meth, probably number 1. No, marijuana number 1.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that didn't even pop into my head. Yes,
meth.
I'd agree with that one.
Crystal meth number 2, MDMA, which some people can't tell the difference between the two, but they're very similar. I would say that those 2, and then let's shoot.
You said cannabis.
Cocaine's a pretty good guess as well. Yeah, so those are my 3.
Oh, those are
How'd
perfect.
we score?
You did pretty well. Keith, you were right out of the gate. Alcohol is actually the first substance that people report pairing with sex, and then it goes cannabis, MDMA, and this comes out of some research that was looking at survey data around the substance that people most pair with, right? So this is not just from the people that are coming to my practice. And then it diverges with the 4th substance between gay men and everybody else. So when we're talking,
so gay men, crystal meth.
What do you think, Courtney?
I'm going to go with meth only because you said it's similar to MDMA. So I'm thinking similar.
It's poppers.
Oh, interesting.
And for everybody else is cocaine.
And then poppers are what?
It's an inhalant. They call it anal nitrate that people can inhale, and it creates this euphoria and muscle relaxation. And it's very short acting, right?
Got it.
So that's like nitrous. When people say they're doing nitrous or whippets, that's
a form of inhalants, but anal nitrate is different. It's a different chemical.
Okay, and it's not quaaludes, which are muscle
Correct.
relaxers.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
but they're related,
Interesting.
right? And what I like about that conversation is it then brings up just all the myths and stereotypes around who uses what drug. So that's why when I was like, what is the fourth most used drug that for gay men? Everyone was like, meth. I was like, no, because actually just in the population, people don't use meth that much compared to other substances, right? Poppers are more available than meth, but so is cannabis and alcohol, right? The reason why, cannabis and alcohol, the number one and number two, is because those are the most used substances just in general. They're easier to get. There's more cultural acceptance around those substances, right? So it's just such a fascinating discussion, kind of hearing people's reactions when I ask that question, because it just brings forward all of these myths and misconceptions about pairing sex with drugs.
That is really fascinating. And then the next level of that, or question that I have, is how much of it, this is probably a hard question to answer, but maybe not, how much of it is this is a great experience when I'm putting aside the negative effects for a moment and the negative experiences. So I recognize there's a lot of risk involved. But if we're talking about the positive experiences, cannabis, you're high, sex is really good, is that a common way that it starts to become a bigger component of your sex life when I would imagine you're more stimulated, you feel things more, so that then when you go back to having sex without drugs, it feels a little bit more, I was going to say damp. That's not the word I'm looking for.
It might feel damp.
But does that make sense?
Yeah, the pleasure might not compare.
There we
right?
go.
It might feel a little
yes.
bland or less interesting. Well, one of the things that I think might be important to talk about is why do people pair sex with drugs? And I think we can kind of build off of that conversation. I think a good way of organizing it is that people will pair drugs with sex is to feel good, to feel better, to do better, or they're curious, right? And this comes, I'm applying the National Institute of Drug Abuse's taxonomy about why people initiate drug use. And I was like, wow, that was a really great list that just applies to why people pair sex with drugs, right? The reasons and motivations aren't different. They're just doing a different behavior. So yeah, like the reason why people will pair substances with cannabis or with MDMA is because it amplifies the pleasure. People feel really good about it and they really enjoy it. People talk about it as it enhances connection, and it's just something that just changes their kind of bodily sensations, and they really enjoy kind of amplifying that with the sexual pleasure that they're experiencing. And then they shift to like the feel better or to not feel at all. So if you think about some of the things that might get in the way of sexual pleasure, things that create inhibition or tap on people's brakes, right? Fear of rejection, body image, shame around what they enjoy. So if I can just kind of disconnect myself from those negative emotions, I can be more present with what's going on. And then what I also like to remind folks is like the do better. We don't necessarily think that people use substances to increase their performance, but of course they do, right? They have athletic enhancements. They have like cognitive enhancements for people who are concerned about ADHD, kind of improves their focus. Some of these substances also improve their kind of social connection or their confidence in social settings. Like cocaine in particular, people talk about it as like, I just feel like I could do anything, right? So like I will take risks. I will communicate what I want sexually. I will approach people around sex. Going back to the ADHD piece, if someone has ADHD and they use a stimulant, they find that they can be more present in the sexual situation, which just enhances their desire and enhances their pleasure, right? And then the last one is curiosity. They're just like, oh, I heard that this is really fun or interesting, or like people in the community have been talking about what it's like to have sex with psilocybin, and they want to test it out. Where things can get problematic, I find, is in that camp of to feel better or to not feel at all, right? That's when some of the problems can really occur for folks, because they start to develop these habits and these shortcuts around addressing some of these negative emotions that are getting in the way of their sexual pleasure. And they aren't addressing the shame head on. They're not addressing their negative body image head on. They're just kind of disconnecting themselves from those feelings so they can have the sexual experiences that they want. And those habits are the things that then can be hard for people to disengage with.
I spoke to you before our call and said we're not going to use jargon and lingo, but
tell me about the lingo that I was using, and I'll try to.
No,
bring it
not
down.
you. No, I'm about to drop some lingo.
Oh, okay.
Because what you
He's
said,
very guilty of that.
I'm going to just dive in and become guilty of it. What you said reminds me of how in IFS and internal family systems we talk about parts. In parts are in the taxonomy of parts are firefighters, managers, exiles, two protectors that both exile emotions, shame, pain. Firefighters, it seems to me you're talking about the firefighter activity for a person, which is just make it stop. I'll do anything to feel better. There's an element of impulsiveness and desperation, and typically regret and shame after when the manager kicks in and says, "Well, you overdid it. That was too much." So that's what I'm thinking, and I'm thinking about like, how do you curate a sort of self-led or centered perspective on this? I imagine you have to be pretty in tune with your emotions and understand how how parts of you are using the drugs to either bypass emotions or generate emotions.
Yeah, curiosity is a tool that I use in therapy all the time, right? I want to help people understand the function of these behaviors, right? So if we determine that part of the reason why they are struggling to modulate their use is because they're using it to extinguish this negative self-talk about their body so they can be present in the moment. And now they have a choice. It's like, well, do I do the hard work of coming to some acceptance around what my body looks like, about what it looks like when I'm naked, what it looks like through the eyes of my partner? Can we do some of that work without the shortcut of getting high? And that's the choice that they're trying to make. And it's not easy work. So you can see why people would choose the convenient route, right? And then struggle with doing some of the more direct work of trying to come to some, if we're talking about negative body image, come to some acceptance around what their body looks like, how it their partner desires them. Can they even see or accept that their partner desires them? Because if they don't think they're attractive, how they probably don't think that their partner does, and they get in their head, and it undermines their ability to be present and be sexual and experience the pleasure and connection that comes through sex.
Is there a space where drugs can be used therapeutically to address those problems? So I'm thinking, to your point on body image and MDMA, like one of the things that really helped me with MDMA was looking in the mirror and being like, oh, wait, that's how I look. Or that's, I'm starting to see myself how somebody else may see me, and becoming much more open and accepting. And of course, that's in a very controlled, safe environment. Is that an avenue that is possible for somebody who is really dealing with trauma when it comes to sex, or are you going down a road or a path that could lead to some scary situations?
Yeah, a couple things. Like, I think it's important to take a step back and just kind of understand the factors that contribute to why someone might have a substance use disorder or substance problems, right? The first one being around acute and chronic stress, right? And that creates the need to self-medicate. It could be around having a co-occurring psychiatric disorder, and that could be PTSD. We've named some others like ADHD. It could also be around depression. So I want to just be mindful that people aren't self-medicating for their PTSD symptoms without talking to a professional around how do we address them. So, but I also don't want to be too precious. I want to honor people's agency and the choices that they make. And some of the research that I was looking at talks about the experience that people share afterwards. And sometimes they use this therapeutic language. So there's like, wow, when I used MDMA in the situation, I could look at myself differently with more compassion and more empathy and more love. and I could see this part of me that was injured, and which is the exact opposite of what happens when someone has PTSD, right? That's more of an avoidant reaction to that injury. So they were able to see it through this lens, right? So when I say this, like, I don't want then people who are listening to the shows like, oh my God, I'm going to treat my trauma with MDMA. I want people to slow down and get curious and see if we can't address some of those avoidant defenses in therapy. And if they make this choice that this is something they want to do, know that there are some risks there, but there can be some benefits as well, right? So I'm always a little nervous around not wanting to be too paternalistic around this issue, but also know that people make choices and will have a relationship with some of these substances that can be beneficial to them. If this is a person's clinical picture, right, they know that they have PTSD symptoms and they want to have that type of experience or journey, I would just remember to get into therapy, to have someone that they can talk to openly and honestly, and a therapist that has some comfort with some of these substances, so they can have these conversations and balance the tension between pleasure and risk, or pleasure and safety, right? So they can allow the person to exercise their own agency while also addressing some of these concerns.
Given that we're both therapists, we probably both share some of the ideals of like everything you just discussed about harm reduction and making sure that we don't encourage drug abuse, right? Obviously, but we also don't want to shame people who experiment or use drugs. So let's just talk about what they do, if we can. Let's just put aside the clinical judgment about why and whether it's too much or not, but and trust that people can have those conversations with others. Going down the list, alcohol, we kind of know it suppresses inhibition and suppresses arousal as well at higher doses, right? So alcohol is a mixed.
Well, particularly with chronic use as well, right? They can low doses. It can even increase arousal, like that type of depressant, like alcohol or GHB is in that category as well. But what people like about it is that it does lower their inhibitions a little bit, right? So that they can express themselves differently, have the sex that they want. But in higher doses, right, it can impair sexual functioning like erections or orgasms, decreases lubrication, but also can impair someone's ability to consent, right? So dose is always important when we're talking about any of these drugs.
Okay, so cannabis. How about cannabis?
Cannabis, similarly, right? It can, people talk about it both in partner sex and solo sex, right? It can increase relaxation. People talk about having more desire and having stronger orgasms. But again, dose is important. If you take too much, right, you can inhibit erections, but also long-term use can also lower testosterone and can disrupt sexual functioning.
Interesting. Did not know that fact. Yeah. I know that there's kind of a currency of thinking that weed is kind of just safe at all times, safe at any speed.
Correct.
And it's not.
Yeah. And
would you agree?
I would totally agree. If people are interested in kind of a challenging read around substance use, I would recommend Carl Hart's work, Drug Use for Grown-Ups. And one of the things he talks about is just providing information that's not just a harm reduction lens, but also more of a lens around increasing kind of health and well-being, right? How do we understand the effects of these drugs, and how do we then integrate that into either our values and kind of what we want here? So he educates so people can make informed decisions. And one of the first things he talks about is like, you have to understand the concept of dose, right? What we're talking about here is kind of a general effect, but we're not necessarily talking about dosing. People have to kind of figure that out on their own. There is too much of any of these drugs that can undermine their desired enhancement of what there is they're trying to do. They have to understand dose. They have to also understand the potency of the drug that they're using, right? The potency talks about the amount of the substance they need in order to have the desired effect, right? A good example is like the potency of heroin is lower than the potency of fentanyl, right? It takes a lot less to have this, the effect of fentanyl, but just doesn't take much for it to become dangerous and create risk. Same with GHB, for instance. The dosing around GHB has to be very precise because it's so easy for people to overdose, lose consciousness, impacts their respiration, and could lead to injury or fatalities, right? So when we're talking about any of these drugs, dose is vitally important for people to consider.
Is GHB a synthetic? Is there another name for GHB?
There's a full name for it.
Right. So
putting you on the spot for a
yeah,
20-syllable word, right?
GHB, GBL, yeah.
Is there
the street name is GHB, or
it is GHB.
Yeah, they call it GHB or
I haven't
G.
heard of that one either.
Yeah.
G. Okay. All right.
Yeah, that one's common in gay male spaces, and is frequently paired with sex because it causes that relaxation and disinhibition, increases sexual arousal, and that relaxation. If you remember correctly, like when we're talking about reasons why people use, it's not just to feel better, but it also changes performance. So relaxation can also be a relaxation of the body so they can engage in penetrative sex in a way that is different than if they were not altered.
Right. And longer, right? For people to have more time engaged, before climaxing, delaying orgasm. Okay, what else? What did we miss?
When we talk about the stimulants.
Let's do that.
Yeah. So we have cocaine, right? Kind of a shorter acting than meth. Meth is much longer acting, which is important for people to understand, right? Cocaine can be up to 2 hours, where meth, the half-life, that is much longer. So it can last like 4 to 16 hours, right? But with cocaine, it can initially boost desire, confidence, and erections, but long-term use can reduce desire and reduce functioning, right? Where meth also increases pleasure, energy. People talk about they feel more connected to their partners and can have stronger erections and orgasms. But long-term use, right, can reduce libido, create erectile dysfunction, fertility issues, psychosis, right? Meth can be much more problematic than cocaine because of how long-lasting it can be. And so it can create disrupted sleep, it decreases appetite, and just can be much more disruptive for folks, right? And can connect with some other issues. For instance, like it's a stimulant, so people with ADHD find themselves they're focused, right? And they really like that, so they're self-medicating this issue while they're also enhancing the pleasure. But it could also be, this is a common issue that I see with some of the guys that come in, it pairs with their eating disorder, right? Because it suppresses appetite. Mm-hmm. So it helps them keep weight off, it helps them feel more desired. And the disincentive is like when they stop using, then they start gaining weight. So they feel less desirable and they feel less sexual, right? So addressing some of these untreated or undertreated psychiatric conditions.
Poppers would be in the same category.
Poppers creates that relaxation. This is much more short acting, right? And it creates this relaxation, particularly in smooth muscles that can be found in both in the throat, anus, and vagina, right? So it allows people, it allows people to have.
Helpful.
Yes, correct.
It's like the perfect drug. Oh my God.
Yeah, and so if you get curious about why people are using, then you're like, oh, okay, this makes sense.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that initial reaction, like, oh my God, what are you doing? You can meet people where they are and kind of get a sense of what is it that they're trying to achieve. And then get to the question, it's like, all right, so tell me about what your body's like without it. Is it tight? Is it rigid? Are you struggling with relaxing without that substance? And that gives me a whole other line of question to get curious about what prevents you from being able to relax when you're engaging in sex with your partner. Is it because you're so self-conscious about the way you look? Or is there pain that shouldn't be there, right? So there's some condition that might be getting in the way, so they're taking this drug as a way to decrease the pain. So it just opens up this avenue. If you can stay curious about what they like about this drug, then we might be able to see some of the obstacles that are impacting their ability to have the sex that they want.
I was going to ask you, why have these conversations? Why is this so important? I know you both have talked about reducing shame, which is, of course, important. But even as you just said that, it's clear that there can be an education opportunity, and it can help if you are using drugs for sex. There's an opportunity to really understand maybe deeper what's going on, and it sounds like create a bit of a map or what you need to work through and what you need to focus on. Is that fair?
I think that's a great analysis, right? Like, much of what I train my clinicians to do is to regulate their own activation around this issue, because substance use in general is stigmatizing. Unconventional sexual behaviors is stigmatizing, and then when you pair substance use and sex, right, it's also very activating. You're just layering it on, right? So the therapist can get very activated and distracted and not know what to do. So I want to just help them stay curious. So they have to evaluate all the reasons why they feel like this behavior is stigmatized, right? So they can kind of feel like they have purpose in these conversations. So that is a great examination, or a great reason to stay curious. It's like, so you can map out the reasons why they are engaging in this behavior, right? And you can't do that if you rush in to communicate about the risks of what they're doing, right? Many times, the client might know about the risk, but they're doing it anyway, and that's what is concerning for them. So they don't necessarily need you to lecture them about that. They need you to create the space to get curious about the function of this behavior. So if we are mapping out the fact that they are so, let's say, embarrassed about the sexual behaviors that they really like, and that embarrassment just creates this anxiety and tension in their body. So now they're addressing the tension in their body with these substances so they can relax, right? It's like, okay, now we have an understanding. We have a better understanding of your clinical picture, and then we can develop a treatment plan that addresses the issues that make you feel so uptight in that moment. Because my goal, right, is not just to reduce harm, right? My goal is I want them to have pleasurable, exciting, fun sex, right? So I can join them in that goal, right? Because it sounds like that's what they want too, and we just have to find a different route if they find that their substance use is becoming too problematic, right? And they want to change their relationship with that.
So what got you into this? Where this was your area of study and focus? Give me your career path.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So as a therapy pup, I started my work in HIV mental health, right? This was in the early 2000s. As a gay man, I wanted to work in the LGBT community, and where I started working was funded through the Ryan White Cares Act. I won't bore you with those details. Ultimately, it was an HIV mental health clinic, and for people who don't really understand what that means, it's working at the juncture of mental health, substance use, and sexual health, right? So the people who were most at risk back then for HIV were people with untreated mental health conditions, an untreated substance use disorder, right? And they were engaging in sex that put them at risk for HIV. So through that desire to help the community address the consequences of HIV, I became a specialist in that juncture. And then from there, I decided to continue to work in the area of sexual health, and then specializing in problematic or out-of-control sexual behavior. So, now I just work with men regardless of sexual orientation, but I've kind of kept my focus and specialization in that juncture. So it just dovetailed into looking at all the reasons why people pair sex with drugs as kind of a part of this umbrella of sexual health.
A lot of times when there was a surprise that the wealthy men running massive companies are facing this. Your life does not have to be totally out of control for this to be a discussion that should be really important to have, right?
Correct.
You're reminding me of Len Bias in the 90s. Len Bias, and I did an episode on this in my other podcast, because he went to University of Maryland. He was the first round draft pick for the Boston Celtics in 1992. He got drafted. That weekend he went to University of Maryland to see his buddies. They were partying. At the parties in the 80s and the 90s, at parties were, alcohol and cocaine, and they were basically thought of as the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So he overdosed and died. And after that experience, so the stereotype was, black people use crack, white people use cocaine. So here's Len Bias using cocaine. And then all these draconian drug laws were passed after that, much harsher for crack, not very harsh for cocaine. So along stereotypes in the sentencing and all that. So you're just reminding me of stereotypes play a role in what we think of.
Well, and the shame of it too, right? The stereotypes that even though they're not true, they play a role in the shame as well.
Right. I don't know if we got a question out of that, but
I don't know either.
it's an interesting point.
No, yeah, and what I tell folks is people don't need to lose everything in order to just change their relationship with drugs. They just need some type of internal conflict if there's something that they want to change, right? So people come in to see me because there could be a conflict with their values. It could be because they've experienced some financial problems. It doesn't mean that because they're resourced that they're any more protected against having a substance use disorder because of their use, right?
Well, just to shift gears, we didn't talk about ketamine, and we've discussed how ketamine would be low on our list to enlist in a sexual enhancement experience. I cannot imagine it, but tell us how people use ketamine.
I mean, you probably know more about the ketamine than I do. I mean, is it more of a dissociative anesthetic, right? And people describe it
at moderate dose. I mean, the mild doses, if people are dosing with something that can be microdosed or small dosed, it is disinhibiting for sure, very strongly and much faster than alcohol. Sort of like 0 to, in about 1 minute, but then it, at a certain point, at a decent dose, if people continue to dose, you just want to lay down and
you're in your own world,
be on the floor somewhere. So.
Yeah.
I mean, it can have that dreamlike, but also detached experience, but there's also can be a pain relieving experience. So
yes,
that people can use it for. I'm going to put this in quotes, kind of like heavier sexual activity, right? In the research, sometimes they call it kind of esoteric behaviors. And when I had to I was like, what are they talking about? And they're talking about esoteric behaviors. So it can be
BDSM?
Could be rougher sex. Could also be fisting, right? Mm-hmm. So that muscle relaxation or things that regulate pain can facilitate some of those type of sexual encounters. But you're right, because if someone uses too much, right, then they can have a loss of control. And the risk there in sexual situations that it can impair someone's ability to consent, right? So people have to just be mindful again around dosing.
Yeah, interesting.
I would imagine consent is a big conversation around all of these, right? Because as you even just start to dabble, that's certainly an important question.
Correct. Keith, you brought up something else that we talk about these drugs in isolation, but oftentimes people are combining drugs.
Yeah.
We have to also understand that some of these are counterindicated, that you don't necessarily want to combine some of these drugs, such as like GHB and alcohol in particular. And so
ketamine and cocaine would be deadly.
Yeah. So do people understand those impacts? And so with consent, it's also helpful, like in the research people were talking about, it's more likely they'll have a positive experience if they're doing this with people that they know and have a relationship with, because they've already talked about what's going on. They probably know each other and know their sexual interests and desires, so they can be in more of that flow situation where many of the negative experiences happen when they're having sex with people that they have not met before or haven't talked about all of these issues before. They don't really know what they like. The person doesn't know what they like. So that's when some of the miscommunication, that's when some boundary crossings and violations can occur. So I think the relationship is important. Context in which they're having sex is important.
You reminded me of a few things. I want to talk about sex workers, because when you talked about the muscle relaxing effect or sort of the disinhibiting or the dissociative effects, I imagine for somebody in that line of work that would be a very tempting or useful thing depending on how you're looking at it. What was the other thing I was going to talk about? Shoot, now I forgot my train of thought.
See, it's not just me.
Question. It's a train of thought day. I'm struggling with mine too.
I know what it was. The other thing I was going to say is we did an interview with Ben Malcolm, who is a pharmacist, lives in Costa Rica. So he practices his medicine pharmacy practice virtually and teaches people about drug-drug interactions with psychedelics. So medications you're taking and then psychedelics, and helps them come to the conclusion of whether they should try this, like ayahuasca, and what they need to do to prepare and get off the medicines. But not only the the recreational drug interactions, uppers and downers or too many stimulants, but then their medications that they're taking for depression, for example, could block the effect of what drug they are trying to use for a specific effect, and then they take way more of that drug than they should to try to get around the blocking.
Past the blocking.
Yeah. I don't have a question in that either, but sex work is yeah.
I was going to say, this goes back to kind of what Courtney was asking around, are there the therapeutic effects of taking these substances? And it's a yes and, right? So let's do this with intention. So if you know that you have a psychiatric condition, right, then I want you to talk to a provider about this. If you know you're on psychiatric medication, talk to your psychiatrist about these choices, because some of these medications that might be on might block the effects, right? And then you're kind of like, what's happening here? And so then you might take more than you probably should, right? So to have these conversations so you can make the most informed choice on the direction that you want to go with these substances.
Is it common for psychiatrists and psychologists to be comfortable talking about these interactions? Like, is this something, I'm just curious if somebody's listening to this and they're thinking, you know what, I would love to talk to somebody. And of course, Michael, will put your information here as well. But what should somebody be looking for when they're doing a search if they think, okay, I want to talk to somebody?
Well, I would just be upfront and ask the question, how comfortable are they? How much experience have they had working with people who use these substances? And if they're not, then you're ultimately responsible for your healthcare, and it's find a provider that is going to be a good fit for you, that you can have these conversations so they can both inform you of the cost benefit, right? But also honor your agency that you are making these choices, whether it be because you want to have fun, or whether it's because you think you want to have, create a different relationship with a traumatic event that's impacting your sexual satisfaction.
It just occurred to me. I mean, I've known drug abuse and drug use goes together with sex work, the sex work industry, right? But what's your familiarity with that in the community here?
I think that is fair. I mean, it's interesting. I was just talking with a client who is in recovery from meth addiction and returned to use, and part of the way he got access, it was through hiring sex workers who then brought his substances. So it was kind of uniquely paired for my client, that type of experience of paying for sex and having access to some of those substances. It doesn't have to be, right? And if people are going to pay for sex and they want to maintain their recovery, they can be, again, explicit about the type of experience that they want to have. And if they want to have this without substances, right, to be open and upfront with that. And I think most people would honor that boundary.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Then a follow-on to that is somebody who's concerned maybe that their partner has an out-of-control sexual behavior, or they may be concerned about their own. Since you work with that, Michael, what are the things people should look for in determining whether it's an out-of-control sexual behavior? And I know we try to not use the word addiction because it's less precise, right? It's less.
Well, it doesn't in the sexual realm, it doesn't really have explanatory power. There's a variety of factors that can contribute to why someone might feel out of control. But I also, that phrase out of control sexual behavior is meant to just be descriptive, right? Sometimes we can kind of slip into kind of a medicalized framework with that question. It's like, how do we know if someone has out of control sexual behavior? Like we would say, how do we know if someone has major depressive disorder? What I say is like, no, this is just a subjective experience that someone feels out of control. it's not meant to be kind of a diagnosis or disorder. So it's up to the person if they feel like they're struggling to regulate this behavior, or they're engaging in sex in a way that they wish they weren't, right? Is that internal conflict. So if they have that type of internal conflict, then that becomes the reason why they can reach out for care. But I don't say then it's like, oh, well, you have then out of control sexual behavior. I don't use it like a diagnostic label. It's just meant to be descriptive, again, so we can be curious about the factors that contribute to why they feel out of control.
Love talking to you about this. Are there other things you'd like to share with people about the work you do and, where to find you, but anything else you wanted to speak about?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, I'm in DC and run several groups for men who are concerned about this issue. And since we're talking about pairing sex with drugs, I can highlight the men's group that I run for gay and bisexual men concerned about their sexual health in recovery from meth addiction. Right? These are the folks who've decided to stop pairing meth with sex, but are struggling to do that. So they kind of reach out to me to be able to disentangle their sex from their meth use. And my hope is that they can recapture and rediscover that part of themselves in a way that feels aligned with their values and is pleasurable for them and satisfying. It's a really powerful group that I enjoy running. I've been doing this work, as I mentioned, since I worked at the LGBT clinic back in San Diego, and I've kind of kept that group going, or that interest in my practice going.
Cool. How can people find you? What's the best way to reach you?
Oh, the best way is michaelvigorito.com.
Pleasure to speak with you, Michael.
It has been a delight. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate the space to have this, because I don't know about you, and I get nervous talking about this topic at times, because there's still so much confusion and stigma around substance use and sex. So hopefully people here, even me, just still working through some of the difficulties with balancing the potential for risk, but also the potential for pleasure and joy. There's still some tension there that I think is the kind of the reason to have these conversations. So I really appreciate you creating the space for that.
Yeah.
No, thank you for chatting with us.
So important to take the secrecy and the shame out of these conversations, because the shame really just shuts down learning and knowledge and
ability to grow,
safety,
right? If you
even.
Yeah.
You're doing great work. Thanks for being here, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks for listening to Tripping Over Love. Subscribe now to make sure you get the latest episode, and drop us a comment or a question. See you next time.